In today's episode of the podcast, we're talking all about how you can help relieve your lower back pain at work. Whether you're working from work or working from home, we're going to talk a little bit about why it's happening, some of the factors that can lead to the development and the slow degradation of the health of your lower back into getting back pain or sciatica. And we're also going to go through towards the end of the episode some strategies, step by step, stackable strategies that you can take. They're really, really simple, super easy, but they make a huge difference. And we'll see why once we've covered this first part of the podcast. So if you've got any questions as we're going through this, if you've tried any of these things before or have any questions about particular devices or whatever they may be, chairs, etc., then please do post those in the comments. We're happy to give you feedback and talk about any of those particular areas that you might have questions. Naturally, with these podcasts, sometimes they always give rise to extra questions and further dialogue. So that's what the comment section is there for, and we welcome all of your comments. So with that out of the way, let's first start by understanding what is actually the main factor with working from work or working from home. The average adult, we've done this a number of times now, spends about 9.5 hours a day sitting down, according to the British Heart Foundation recent research. And the average, I think it was about 80% of adults in the UK and US workforce have sedentary jobs. So that's just in the workplace. You're doing that 7 to 9 hours, most of the time sat down. That's not including any of the commuting time. That's not including time at home eating. That's not including all the other things that you do in the evening, relaxing in front of the television, etc. All of that time is extra to the time that we spend sitting at work. And that is where the main issue arises. It is that long duration of sitting at your workstation. Most people, if you have a look around your office, are not sat upright. They're not sat on the sitting bones. They are sat on their tailbone. They're sat on their sacrum, which is why we see online many comments about, oh, but my tailbone hurts, etc. Or, why does my tailbone hurt when I'm sat down? Because you shouldn't be sat on it. But that's a topic for another video. That's poor form. And when we're sitting in these positions for prolonged periods of time, we essentially take our natural lumbar lordosis, the backward bending curve of the lumbar spine, and we eliminate it. We squash it. We flatten it out. And as we do that, we lean back into our chair, we round our torso forwards, and we get to work into that computer screen. And to the degree our work is more frustrating, more focus intensive, etc., we're going to be climbing into that computer screen more, and therefore the effect on our posture is likely to worsen. On top of that, we're less likely to move because we're more and more focused. Now, some jobs, if you're a trader, if you're doing certain tasks on the computer, you are going to find that you are pinned to the desk. There's less wiggle room. There's less room for flexibility. But many of you working will find there are ways in which we can improve the status quo, ways in which we can borrow little bits of time here or little modifications there to really improve the overall health of our back during our working day, because it's generally that slow, sustained assault on the lower back. It's not severe or forceful in any meaningful way, but it's steady. It's just this steady strain, this logo strain that's going onto our lower back over the weeks, the months, the years, the decades that causes this onset of back pain. And the first issue is going to be the compression. When we're sat in that position that I mentioned a moment ago, we are squashing down on the front portion of our spinal vertebral units, and that is going to be the front portion of our discs. We're squashing down on the front, and that drives compression through this region. We get a stretching on the back, and we have in the center of the disc, we have the nucleus, and that's a fluid-like gel-like structure, and we often hear the analogy of a jam donut. That would be the jam inside the donut, and then we have this encasing called the annulus fibrosus, which holds it in place, and that allows it to absorb shock. It allows it to function as a spacer between one vertebra and the next. So we've got spaces for the little nerves to come out the side of the spine, to go down to the leg, or wherever the case may be. And what's happening is as we squash down on the front of that disc, it drives the nucleus backwards into those layers of, in the case of the donut, the dough. And as we do that, we've all had that experience. We bite down on the front of the donut and it squirts out the back. Well, over the years, that assault and that strain on the annulus fibers, which hold the disc in place, starts to become worn. It starts to become a little bit too much. Maybe that's, we've got some injuries or some traumas peppered in there, some higher level accidents, maybe outside of the workplace, etc. But it fundamentally becomes weaker. And that's where these sorts of injuries start to take place. So we've got that compression happening. And then on the back part of the spine, including the back parts of the disc, we have the stretch. So we're pulling these ligaments apart, the ligaments on the back of the spine, the muscles, but also the ligaments on the back of the disc. The annulus is very ligamentous in nature, in its structure, and we're pulling those apart. And the real issue here comes from the sustained stretch. You see, our spine is perfectly reasonably meant to move. It is designed to move in all directions, all the time. There are no movements that it is not designed to do fundamentally. We've got all the range of motion. If you can move forwards, you can move forwards. If you can move back, you can move back. It's perfectly fine. However, what it does not like is sustained stretch, and that is the peculiar feature of modern working life, this sustained stretch. Because as you put sustained stretch through the ligaments, they start to undergo a process called creep. And that creep is whereby the ligament has its sort of elastic properties where it can pull apart as you bend forwards or any direction, and then it can retract back to the position that it started at. Not in a active role like the muscles, but it's just kind of like an elastic band. But over time, in one sitting, as we pull it, it then, after a certain period of time, it starts to deform. And that means that when we let go, it doesn't contract all the way back to the start. It's left with a little bit of wiggle room. And that little bit of wiggle room allows things to move a little bit erroneously, a little bit incorrectly. And we've all heard, but many people will be able to relate to the experience of being sat down for a long period of time and then going to get up. Maybe you don't even consider the fact that you were sat down for a long period of time. You just remember that time you went to get up and your back went. Well, if we think back, it wasn't that we immediately sat down and got back up again. It was probably that we were sat down having a nice conversation, maybe doing some work. We turned around to get out and boom. Or maybe we got out of the car and boom, then the back goes. Because we've been sat down, we've allowed that creep process to take place with a bit of compression on the front of the discs. Then we go to move suddenly in one direction or other. And that weakness is exploited, that vulnerability is exploited. And boom, now we've got an L4-5 or L5-S1 disc bulge. And coincidentally, that's the area that is most under strain, generally speaking, when we are sitting in these postures, in these bad postures, slumped into our chair or leaning forwards. It's those areas that get affected most. So that's really what's happening here. Now, we do lay over this the superficial phenomenon of the muscles being tight. Okay, the muscles are tight primarily because they are held in an elongated stretch for the same period of time that the discs are, the same period of time that the back is flattened out, the same period of time that you are sat in that bad posture for an extended period. And the muscles don't like that. But make no mistake, they are stretched and pulled apart during this time period. And just like any other tissue that's held in a long period, in one position for a long period of time, those muscles are going to let you know about it. They become tense, they become uncomfortable. And we constantly make the mistake, or people constantly make the mistake of assuming that soreness, that tiredness, that tightness in the muscles requires more stretching, and it just simply isn't true. So take a moment, maybe now, to have a think about when you experience maybe some back tightness, and if it's associated or tied to you being sat down at work for an extended period, think about, are those muscles actually shortened and contracted and in need of stretching, or are they actually stretched out because I'm slumped in my chair for a long period of time, in which case that's not what they require. And we did a whole episode on muscle spasm in the lower back and muscle spasm in general, and helping you guys understand that in a lot more detail. So definitely check that out. I won't bore you with the details here, but just know that it's really misunderstood. And if we can understand it better in the short snippet that I've just given you and the detailed podcast, then you will be much better off for dealing with it effectively, rather than going around in circles doing silly exercises like knee hugs and those other ones that kind of stretch it even more. But the reality is, kind of moving on to sort of evaluating working from home now in comparison to working from work, is that so often the back pain that you experience, I would say the significant majority of cases, it started off as an ache, it started off as a discomfort, it started off as not being too bad, and it's just ignored and ignored and ignored and ignored and ignored. And maybe there are some episodes peppered in there that have been a bit more significant, but they've died down. It's so common that someone with back pain has this sort of experience of getting discomfort that's gradually built over the years, and we haven't done anything about it because you can ignore it for so long until you can't. And that's when we kind of start going, oh, now I've got to do something about this. Or you're forced to do something about it, often against your will, because you've got so many other things, and now your back's gone, and oh my God, I've got to deal with that and this and that and that. And it becomes a little bit overbearing, to say the least. But know that it's often, very often, the case that we have ignored it for too long. We haven't done the necessary things to deal with our back health until we now have back disease, if you will, or back absence of back health. And now we realize, maybe I've been taking my body for granted this far. And it's a little bit more work to get out of the hole, so to speak. And we'll talk about some of the strategies later on. So don't worry about that. We'll get to those in due course. Now, with the events of the last couple of years, we've also got the increasing acceptance of working from home. And that offers different challenges. And we think, oh, maybe working from home is a lot better. But there's a few things to think about when it comes to working from home. Now, even pre-2020, offices and employers were really taking the initiative in many cases, not all, but many cases, and investing in their staff well-being, welfare, and investing in ergonomic setups, investing in desk assessments, investing in sit-stand desks, all these other sorts of things to help your setup. Now, with the advent of working from home, you might think, oh, I don't have to go to work anymore. This is great. It's got lots of advantages, which it sure does. But are you spending the same amount of money on setting up your desk at home to make sure that the ergonomics, etc., are all as good? Or are you working from the kitchen table, or worse still, working from the sofa, on a laptop, not on a proper workstation? Thinking about these sorts of things and thinking, oh, maybe my back pain has gotten worse since I've started working from home, or that's something to really consider. Are you actually working from a setup that's good, or is it something that we've kind of not considered when employers often have spent quite a lot of money on this? Now, granted, some of you who are taking working from home as the way forwards, or maybe some sort of hybrid setup, you might well have invested in some of that setup at home to make sure it really is perfect for you, and it's not going to have the same sort of disadvantages as working from the kitchen table or working from the sofa. But it is something that people often don't think about, and that can again allow this creeping in of back pain, because sitting at the office or sitting on the sofa, these other sorts of things, they don't injure your back in one go, but it's the cumulative strain laid on top of other perhaps minor injuries and strains when you're out and about that starts to build a degree or starts to erode your back health. So that's something to think about first and foremost. Secondly, we don't do enough exercise as a society, and we certainly don't do enough resistance exercise. But when it comes to just exercise in general, for many people, as they get busier through work life, family life, social life, etc., the commute to work may well have been the only exercise they did. Maybe you cycle to work, maybe you walk to work, or have some sort of drive part way and then walk the rest. That commute was a form of exercise. And if we're just working from home, or working from home half the time, now we've lost the only form of exercise on those days. And that it's going to help with our cardiovascular system, which is going to help with a number of other health parameters. And that's going to have a positive effect on your lower back to a degree. So we want to think about, are we replacing that if we're working from home with something else? Or are we just using that extra time to do other stuff that we're interested in, or whatever the case may be, spend time with the kids, etc. So that's a specific area that maybe could negatively affect your back health. To the contrary, as we'll talk about in a moment, it could be a positive as well. So that's something to think about, because fundamentally, if we are working from home, we do have more flexibility. So if we're in the throes of a back injury, having that flexibility to not worry about work colleagues, etc., for that week or that couple of days where you're at home, you can get up and move around. You can be a little bit more free to do those things if you are working from home than, say, the office. And if you're in particular discomfort at this particular moment, the thought of commuting into work or getting into work might be a problem in of itself, to the point where you just can't go to work. So you have to work from home. So that is a benefit to working from home. And if, for example, we utilize that extra time that we have, now we're not having to commute in every day, which might be an hour in the car or an hour on the train, etc., then that can also be an advantage. We can use that time to do some proper working out, be it from home or be from a gym nearby. That can really make a difference, and that can improve your back health. But we have to take these active decisions, active steps. And unfortunately, the back pain creeps in because we didn't take active steps. We just let it roll on by. Like so many other health issues in many cases, we just let it roll on by until it's a problem. The same as the desk setup. If you actively go and do the desk setup, then we can make a big difference. And I think that kind of leads perfectly into the strategies at the end of today's podcast. I wanted to go through a couple of things that you can do to stack, whether it's working from home, whether it's working from the office, to stack your sort of well-being, if you will, stack these points together to improve your lower back health, whether it's you've got back pain, you're returning to the office and you want to do so in a sensible manner, or whether you don't have back pain, you just want to do something that's going to make sure you avoid that for the long term. Maybe you've had it in the past and you're doing okay at the moment. Make sure you incorporate these tips to help you overall keep your back healthy and keep your back well. So the first one, and I do say they stack, and then you'll see how they stack quite nicely together to make a really quite a easy but very helpful approach to keeping your back healthy. So the first one is be a fidget. It sounds really silly. It sounds, like, oh, what do you mean be a fidget? But it really makes a difference. Camping out in one spot for extended periods is a big issue. We discussed at the start of the podcast, the biggest issue is that sustained stretch, because as we get that sustained stretch after a period of 20, 30 minutes, and we start to deform those ligaments and create a degree of slightly increased instability in our lower back, that is one of the biggest issues with the workplace and creating vulnerabilities in our lower back that can be exploited by a sudden movement or whatever the case may be. If we're fidgety, we never allow that feature, that quirk of our ligaments to creep in. So just by moving around, redistributing your body weight, it can really make a difference, let alone if we actually have an active back injury. Say we've got a disc injury at L4-5 or something like that. Moving around can redistribute our weight so we're not constantly putting it on the same area, and maybe that area is perhaps an injured area. So that's really important. Also, some of the challenges that we have when we have particularly bad sciatica or other symptoms of the back pain, we want to adopt positions that maybe aren't so good, for example, rounding forwards. If instead we're moving around a little bit more, we also get that additional benefit of just helping pump the area. Think about your lower back like a little sponge. If you're sat still, you're not necessarily getting as much of the sort of pumping movement to get rid of excess inflammation in the lower back, inflammation in that area. And by fidgeting and moving around a little bit, we create a little bit of a pumping effect, like getting that sponge, you kind of wringing it out a little bit. It's not as much as full-blown getting up and moving around, but it makes a difference when we have to focus. So if we just steadily redistributing our weight, it can really help. And that's kind of the first and foremost point. The next one is think about ways in which you can incorporate walking around the office or walking around home. This is maybe a little bit less easy to do, especially if, say, you were editing a video or you were doing something that involved a little bit more attention, writing an article, writing a podcast article, for example. You're not really going to be able to get up and walk around as much. But when you're reviewing it, maybe you've got it on your tablet, maybe you've got it on your phone, or maybe it's an email that you've written, or maybe it's a phone call that you're taking. Get up on your feet and just walk around to the degree you can. I mean, you can't start running around the office if it's not appropriate to do so, but you can get up and move around, and that just change in position when you're doing certain tasks can help with your focus, but it can also help change the mechanics of what's happening on your lower back in terms of forces, pressure, strain, and also thinking about those muscles, they like to move. So if you've been sat down for 20 minutes or something like that, writing out an article or writing out an email, it's always better to maybe have a breather before you fire it straight off, because sometimes those things sent in haste can be a problem. So you get yourself up, get the email up on your phone, have a little walk around, have a read of it. Okay, great. And then hit send. There's a dual benefit there, not only for the substance of the email, but also for the quality of your back health, and the discomfort that you might or might not be experiencing at that time. So that's the second one. The third one is going to be using a sit-stand desk. And I must stress, don't get the manual ones. The ones that you have to hoist up, because that just doesn't get used. From personal experience, you buy it, you use it, and then you stop using it because you can't be bothered. It's so much more effective to buy something that's going to actually get used. And although they're a little bit more expensive, being able to have two program heights, level 1, level 2, and just go bump, and it just comes up, and bump, and it just goes back down again, makes a huge difference because you'll actually use it. And that's really the important part. As a quick tangent or side note, one of the pet peeves of mine is when patients would go to their GP and they say, oh, you don't need to take a supplement, or you don't need to take a protein or whatever, just get that stuff from your natural diet. And it's like, yeah, but do you? But do you actually get it from your diet, or do you not? And if you don't, then let's just use a supplement, for example. It might be something simple, protein being a good example. If we're not getting enough, just take the supplement. Now, yes, it's easier to you can use the hoist, but the reality is it doesn't get used after maybe the first week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and then it's just a normal desk in a set position, and that's annoying, and it's not actually fulfilling its purpose. So invest in a sit-stand desk if you can, or if your employer can. They make a huge difference. You might spend 15, 20 minutes, hit the button, up it comes, and now you're going to be standing up. Some of you will find that you can't really focus in certain positions on certain tasks, and other tasks you can do standing up. So that's entirely up to you, and you just need to figure out what works for you. But the ability to change the position that you're in is going to be really helpful. The next one is invest in a good chair. And the chairs come in two categories. And I was thinking about this as I was writing the podcast and thinking about, what would be the best recommendation in this particular scenario. And I do think where possible, again, having two chairs kind of makes sense, because you want one chair that's got a good amount of support, okay? That you can sit back in and you're nice and comfortable, your back's supported, etc. Head's maybe even supported as well. Some of these will have really good lumbar supports, but I do find that quite often, unless you're buying a reasonably expensive chair, and expense is not always proportional to the goodness of the chair or the quality of the chair in terms of its ergonomics. Sometimes you go and buy a really expensive chair and it's absolutely rubbish. But you've bought it maybe for other reasons. But generally, a good supportive chair is going to be a good investment for when you're sat down doing work at the desk in a seated position. I wouldn't worry too much about the lumbar supports, because quite often they're in the wrong place. And I do find that actually using a towel is going to be more helpful, and I'll touch on that in a moment. But get that good chair so that you've got a base station to start from, and make sure it's set up appropriately with your desk height. The next thing is a posture chair. Now, why do I split this into two? Because you'll see things like kneeling chairs, perching chairs, so like a stool for when you're kind of on the standing position. You'll see things like, other Swiss balls, for example. They're all great options, but the reality is they don't have a back. And when you're tired, you're not going to sit all day there. And also, if you're someone who's not used that kind of chair for many years, you're certainly not going to switch over to those. You're only going to, for any length of time, you're going to find that your back feels really tight, really tired, really sore, and all of a sudden, you're back over like this again, and now you've got no support. It's not even like you're leaning back into a chair. You're just collapsing on your own spine. That is not helpful, and that is without a doubt a big mistake. If you've got one to switch into, however, you've got your seated chair, and you might say, do you know what? I'll write this next email with the kneeling chair. So you move the other one out of the way, get onto the kneeling chair, and now you're in a nice upright position. It's a bit of a change. It's a little bit easier for your spine to be in a neutral position because the thighs are dropping away from you rather than up at 90 degrees. And so you can stay there for a little while. You engage in your posture, sitting well. As soon as you start to find, no, I'm starting to slump a little bit, switch back over to the chair or get the position up in standing. They don't take up a lot of space, so you really can do this quite well. And we could say instead of using the kneeling chair, you could use a perching stool, and that could be something that when you're working from a standing position, you've got a little stool you can slide in to perch on for a few moments, and then you can slide it back out again. And that can work quite nicely. Using these as little tools, providing obviously you've got the space, can be a really nice strategy. And if we're working from home, we might be a little bit more lucky with having that space to maybe just move one of these chairs in and out so we can switch up the positions. And again, that is in alignment with the principles of fidgeting. We've got fidget when you're on the thing. We've got fidget by getting up and walking around, etc. We've got fidget by sit stand. We've got fidget by switching chairs. These sorts of things make a difference. And you don't have to switch them every 5 minutes, but it might be once every 30 minutes, every 45 minutes, every hour, every time you change over a task. Getting into these little habits can really make a big difference to your back health, and it can make a big difference to, when you come to the end of the day, you don't feel like, oh, my back's killing me, and then you're in a bad mood when you get home. You want to feel good, or if you're home when you finish work, if you're working from home, and then you're kind of like, oh man, my back's just killing me. If you've made these switches during the day, you might find you finish the day feeling an awful lot better than you ordinarily would in the past. So just to touch on the towel topic, using a simple rolled up towel. This is one of our favorite exercises, one that we recommend for everybody for back health, lying on the floor over the rolled up towel. But taking a smaller towel, tea towel, something like that, and rolling it up and placing it in the base of your spine. You go down your spine until you find the two little bony dimples at the base of the spine. Now that's around about the level of your sacrum. So we want to come up about that much, about an inch or so from there. And that's where the towel can sit. And if you get your bum right into the back of the chair, slide the towel in and then sit up nice and tall over it, you'll feel it supporting the natural arch. Now, if you've got any lower back pain, lower back issues, sciatica, etc., at this time, you might feel that your hamstrings are a little bit tight. So as you put your legs out in front of you, you'll feel your back being pressed into the towel, and the towel at least blocks it in that position. But you can see how easily and how insidiously that lumbar lordosis can be eliminated by just sitting in the chair. And then before you know it, you've been there for half an hour, 45 minutes without the towel, and your lumbar spine's all flat again, and that's making things worse. Whereas if you've got the towel, at least it acts as a buttress to support your back a little bit more. And because it is a towel there, you can actually move it up and down. The big problem with built-in lumbar supports is you can't move them up and down, and they don't fall out when your bum slides forward. So if you slide forwards on the chair with your bum, so you're sitting into a slouched position, the big issue that you'll find is that the lumbar support now actually supports bad posture. So if you've got a towel, the towel's going to fall out and you're going to know it's moved, and it's going to be a little bit uncomfortable sometimes. So you'll then be prompted to move it back into position. So just something to think about. Yes, it's a little bit inconvenient, but once you get into the habit of doing things like many others, you're going to find it's an awful lot easier. And just while we're talking about the habit of things, people think, oh, well, I couldn't sit like that, etc. Just look to your left, look to your right when you're in your office, or when you're in a coffee shop, or when you're at home around the dinner table. Everyone sits differently, and everyone is equally as comfortable in their particular positions, whether it's bad posture, whether it's good posture. It's just practice and how you train your body to do it. It takes a little bit of time, a little bit of conscious effort, but once it's a habit, you will do it without thinking. And that's one of the important principles of generally any exercise and learning to move correctly, any practice. Once it becomes habit and kind of subconscious, it's so much easier, and we can kind of almost park the mental effort it takes to think about these things. And now we have something that's working for us rather than working against us from a health point of view. The final little one, which is a little bit of a peculiar one, is drink plenty of water. Now, drink plenty of water. Have a bottle on the side of your desk, something big. Now we've got one here, nice big bottle. It's 2 litres. Okay, it could be a litre, it could be less, but have it on the desk. Drink it regularly. 2 reasons. Number one, being hydrated is only going to be a help to your general health and well-being. Number two, when it gets empty, you're going to have to go and fill it up. That gives you a cue to get up and move. And additionally, because you're drinking a lot of water, you're going to have to go to the bathroom. And that's a secondary cue to get up and move. It just helps your body work for you. Your body will tell you need to get up because you need to go to the bathroom rather than you just kind of plowing through. So that's kind of got a dual benefit, and that's only going to be a positive addition to your kind of workspace to help you fundamentally with your lower back health. And the final thing is really working from a prevention point of view. If you're lucky enough to be working from home or having some sort of hybrid setup, then you've got some extra time in the working day, in the working week. But devote it to a relatively small amount of working out, doing some proper resistance training. This could be 30 to 45 minutes, 3 to 5 times a week. It's a very small amount of time that you'd be investing, but it would be working to improve the state of health in your lower back. As you will probably know if you've watched this far, you know we spend too much time sat down. We spend too much time sedentary every single day, every single week. It's so much better to be proactive about these things, build strength, get involved in some sort of resistance training program, whether it's in the gym, whether it's at home, whether it's a hybrid, it doesn't really matter. Whether it's out in the garden or out at the local park where they've got these sort of fitness setups, do something where you can start to build resilience and strength into your spine. Following the sort of principles that we talk about on the podcast, that we teach and show and go through with you guys in the Back in Shape program, because that will ultimately work to buttress your body against injury. It will support you, create a suit of armor against these sorts of insults. And in combination with some modifications like the ones we've talked about in today's episode, it really will be a boon to your back health, because back pain really can negatively affect people. And the frustrating thing is poor back health, maybe even before back pain, is something that so often is just let happen. It's very rare that we see people that have had a significant unlucky accident. Sometimes they do, and that does happen, of course. But most people, it's just not taking care of your back health until it is not there anymore. And then you realize how much it actually means to your quality of life, your enjoyment of life. So make the time so that your back doesn't force you to make the time when you least want to. Hopefully this episode of the podcast has been helpful. Hopefully you can take those little tips, implement them starting tomorrow or maybe even today into your working day, whether it's at home or whether it's in the office, and start to improve the degree of comfort that your back is in during the day. As always, if you've got any questions, any comments, as I mentioned earlier on, post those in the comment section below. If there's any particular chairs or any particular things that you have tried or have seen online that you're not sure about, post them down there and we'll get back to you on our thoughts on them, or maybe even we'll do a review on the ones that get asked about most and look into them a little bit further to see what they're all about. But thanks for watching us. Thanks for joining this episode of the podcast. If you did find it helpful, give us a thumbs up. Consider subscribing to the channel, and we'll see you in the next episode of the podcast. Thanks for watching.